BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Jeito Capital, a leading global independent private equity fund with a patient benefit-driven approach aimed at financing and accelerating the development of groundbreaking medical innovation. Jeito's unique investment strategy combines significant capital and collective expertise to support companies and their management teams, ranging from clinical development to market access for cutting-edge innovations, with one main objective: go faster for the patient. Learn more at jeito.life.
Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. I'm Stephen Hansen, your host and Director of Biopharma Intelligence here at BioCentury, and we are coming to you from the beautiful Bruges in Belgium, where we are wrapping up the 25th edition of our BioEquity Europe Conference, which was brought to you by BioCentury and EBD Group. Joining me to discuss the key takeaways from this event are Anne Horgan, partner at Cambridge Innovation Capital, Senya Pavlitic, partner at Jeito Capital, and then from BioCentury side, we have our esteemed VP and Editor-in-Chief, Simone Fishburne, and our head of BT, Josh Berlin. Before we jumped in, I just wanted to comment on...
I like the esteemed bit.
Good. I'm glad you like that. The weather this week, could we have asked for better weather for a BioEquity conference?
No, fantastic.
It kind of feels, it's like Southern California, basically.
Yeah, I've had at least, I'd say 15 of our good friends from Belgium personally take credit for the weather. So
I've heard it's like this year round.
Very much appreciate it. Yes.
It's like this year round too, is that right?
Isn't that part of the regional host package? You have to guarantee the weather?
Yeah, you should worry about that actually, because you're on the regional host committee for Cambridge. So we'll come to that later.
Setting myself up for it.
You're on the hook. Now we need perfect weather in Cambridge in September. Can you deliver that, do you think?
In Cambridge, when it rains, it pours. So hey, let's see.
So anyway, thank you to our sponsors again for the tremendous conference and for the weather. Thank you, sponsors, for the wonderful weather the past few days. So we've had 2.5 days of panel discussions, meetings, fireside chats about sort of the complexity of the moment for biotech and what it means for Europe. So to start off, I'm going to be asking each of you kind of what your key takeaways were from the conference. I'm going to start with my esteemed colleague,
I think we're going to make that a requirement now in the group. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. My esteemed colleague, Simone, to give her thoughts on some of the takeaways. Simone, what did you see as your big takeaways?
Okay, so first of all, I just noticed that you and Josh have both got loads of notes. And so I don't. Okay, so I'm going to do this, but half the notes...
Don't cheat off my notes.
Yeah, I will. I'll note that 3 women are able to do this without the notes. But anyway, on this panel, let me get down to it. So, we opened... I don't think you mentioned that this is the 25th.
I did mention it was the 25th, but that's okay. You can re-emphasize the fact.
It is. So it's the 25th year of bioequity. It's really quite a remarkable achievement. And, it's just really a bioequity community. And so we kicked it off with a scene setter, which has become traditional. And this year we did something that's not so traditional. We had a session after that where where Dave and Karen, co-founders of BioCentury and our esteemed CEO and chairman, were joined by, I think, 7 other panelists who were in the very original bioequity. And so what we had was talking about the complexity of the moment, which I'll, go into in a minute, and then followed by the sort of look back and the experience of the people who've seen this through the 25 years and what it was like back then. And, I don't really think I need to lay this out for people, but just this idea of the complexity being, we've had bear market for, 900 years now, it feels like, but sort of maybe 4. And we have rising innovation, competition from China, from Asia. We have a geopolitical change on steroids, basically, with, a lot of uncertainty is at least something we can agree on with what's going on in the US. And then part of that is for our industry is the regulatory uncertainty. So we sort of looked about unpacking all of this. And that's really been the theme of the conference, and it's sort of, we'll pick up some of the threads. But 2 things came out of the session that Dave and Karen moderated that really stuck with me and I think resonated in the audience. And remember, we're talking about, is this Europe's moment? And what does the changes in the US mean for Europe's opportunity in biotech? And one of those was really something I've been thinking, but was just said so much more eloquently than I can manage, right?
That happens sometimes.
It does. It does. But there is this idea that, I grew up in the UK, and there is this idea that actually, I think people who grow up out of the US and are much more familiar with than people in the US. And there was this, this idea that the US has been really the dominant force in science for several decades. There's a second idea that the rest of the world has had a love affair with the US. So unpicking the first one, what he said is that is not God-given. And it really only started after the Second World War. He didn't use the word Vannevar Bush, but really that's when investment in US science really took off and where US actually built that preeminence. And part of it was on the back of, or on the force of, people who'd left Europe after or during or before the Second World War and come over to America, and really many of those created that foundation. And, those of us who grew up in Europe know that 100 years ago, it was Germany, it was France, it was the UK, it was, various places in Europe where science were really the foundations or the headquarters, as it were, the drivers of science. And the not God-given stuff is, I think, something that is, his point really was that this has to be preserved. It can be lost. It's not inevitable. Just following on from that was the love affair, was this, we've had this love affair with the US, the rest of the world has, and now they're kind of a jilted lover, right? So on top of the US sort of losing maybe its preeminence there, I think there's some, I don't know if he didn't use the word enmity, but there's certainly this idea of a lover who's been harmed or spurned or jilted or something. And, so those were a couple of things that I think resonated with people and are really important.
Yeah, I think to your point, Simone, one thing that resonated on the scene setter to me that you moderated was, Antoine Papernik of Sofanova. And Sofanova's been a partner of this event since the very first year, 25 years ago. But he made some comment on stage about how language matters and how you express yourself can often be more impactful than actually what you're saying, and how that's really had an impact on, folks like Antoine, just the
rhetoric,
the rhetoric, and how that has been tough for folks to deal with who have been, I think, like many, like you said, sort of in love with the U.S. So tough times, yeah.
Can I go to one more comment that stuck with me? Because a lot of conversation, obviously, in the last few days has been around the most favored nation, right? And I don't know if you're going to pick up on that, but there was one comment also made on Dave and Karen's panel that was this idea that if you really bring in most favored nations, so if you really bring in the same price in the US as you do in Europe, then why would anyone necessarily go to the US first to develop that drug? And so it loses that whole dominance that it currently has. I guess if you layer on top of that FDA, uncertainty about that regulatory agency. So there was just sort of that thing thrown in there, which I don't think is something that people are really digesting so much in that way as they think about it.
By the way, I mean, if we've been doing drinks on every time the word uncertainty was mentioned this week, I don't think I would be here right now.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say most favored nation, because that would also
you could do that one as well. No, I think you make really good points, and it's I guess what I took away from that sort of commentary about the U.S. dominance was that I guess it dovetailed as well for me with sort of the idea of sort of FDA as sort of being the gold standard, and NIH as being sort of the leading preeminent sort of basic research organization. Is that I think in a lot of ways, at least in my sort of growing up in the sector, it was very much taken for granted that was the status quo and that it would forevermore be the status quo. But I think the point that he was making is that it's fragile. It's much more fragile than you probably, think it is.
Those of us who grew up in a country where they thought they had an empire thought the same for a long time. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'd like to turn to Senya now. If you could maybe share with us what were some of your key takeaways. I know you were busy running around, had tons of meetings and things, but I know you were also on a panel. So maybe you could share with us some of the big takeaways that you had from the week.
Yes, with pleasure. Actually, I don't feel like, how did you call us? Believer lover?
Oh yeah, a jilted lover.
Okay. Jeito Capital, as you know, it's a European growth capital fund. And for us, we observe the situation, and the takeaways are very similar to what you were saying. Everyone talks about the uncertainty. Everyone talks about what's going on in the US, and everyone, not to go gloomy, is actually questioning, is this a true opportunity for Europe? And at least on our panel and also in the discussions in the corridor. By the way, the discussions in the corridor are so much more fruitful than...
What were they saying? Do tell.
Actually, it is an opportunity for Europe. It is an opportunity for Europe because all the uncertainty that we see across the Atlantic, it's giving us a chance to step up. And before it was, you could not have as many European funds that could, let's say, play peer-to-peer with American boys. But now we have European girls who can actually play with American boys. I think that's, it is a true, I mean, jokey aside, but that's a true opportunity for Europe. Nevertheless, we should not be naive in knowing that there are so many things in Europe that is different to US, you know, being super fragmented as a market, even though the FDA, you know, is going through some turmoils, but you know, when you're thinking from, as an investor, when you're developing, let's say you're investing in a small biotechs who are developing therapeutics largely for Europe and for US, even with all the turmoil, US remains a dominant market in terms of business opportunity because that's where the pharma who ultimately buys the companies that we invest in sees this as a bigger opportunity. And it's not only driven by the difference in price, it's actually driven also by the structure that you have in Europe. The second thing that we also see as an opportunity, you really get companies repriced. I mean, it's unfortunate for some of the CEOs with whom we talked. I mean, sometimes it breaks my heart because I was a CEO in my previous life and I'm super happy. I'm not a CEO today fundraising because the companies really get repriced. In a way, it's a correction. It's a very painful one that we have to go through, but as an investor, that's an opportunity for us. And it's an opportunity maybe to think not only, okay, let's take advantage of it, but let's see if we can do something good for it. Because we do also have a responsibility to bring these therapeutics to patients, but also do something good from our investment on top of having a superior return. So, we were more like positive. It's a time for Europe.
So, I mean, so your panel was largely focused on growth capital and sort of the needs and the opportunity for growth capital. And at least my takeaway when I was sitting there listening was there was a lot of this discussion about, is there enough European growth capital now? Obviously, there's more. It's much better, right? I mean, if you do a comparison to what it was, say, 10, 15 years ago, it's a hell of a lot better. But there was some people sort of moaning, oh, well, there's still reliance on, you know, the U.S. You still have to have, you know, U.S. funding to get a big deal done. Why should we care where the capital comes from? I mean, as long as you have access to the capital, does it matter if it's European or Asian or the U.S.? I mean, as long as the company can access it, do we care?
Okay, I'll tell you. If I put a CEO...
You can say we do, but I just, I want to know.
Actually, as a CEO, I don't think anyone would care because what they need is get the capital in order to bring the therapeutics to the next stage. Me as an investor, I actually have to care because we also get financed through institutions that are largely European, and this is European taxpayer money. So we need to take also care that this money goes back to the source. So there is an element of, I would say, responsibility, you know, political, social also, that some of that money comes back to Europe.
Stephen, isn't there another angle? So, you know, there's that, and, you know, I agree, like, money's got no color, right? It doesn't matter where it came from, but on the other hand, isn't it really like sort of almost like supply chain? Isn't it about optionality? Isn't it about the super extreme dependence on the US and creating sources of capital? Or I think, you know, one panel was talking about unlocking. I think Jerome was talking about unlocking capital. You might want to explain a little bit more what the strictures are. But my point is more like not that the US gets replaced by Europe, but that maybe the balance has shifted so that Europe becomes more of a possibility when times are bad.
You'd mentioned
when you're love a jilt.
You'd mentioned that, I think, last night in one of our little chats over drinks or whatever, and I started thinking a bit more about that, and I almost thought, I think the supply chain is an interesting analogy. It's almost like capital supply chain security. So like when there are these moments where there is, I think that is something of the pushback, right, is that when there are these times where there is massive upheaval and you can't rely on, maybe your American company that you might typically syndicate with, maybe they're having redemption issues or something like that, where there's relative stability in Europe and you're not facing those same issues, then if you had more access to the capital, then you would have more, sort of the capital supply chain might be more reliable. And I guess that is maybe the pushback on that it matters where it comes from.
Do you want to just explain for the audio audience a little bit about what unlocking the capital means, like the way that some of it's inaccessible and so how they were talking about?
Well, I can, it's because if you have until maybe 10, 15 years ago, the large capital was actually primarily just in the US. So you had many European companies, they could do seed rounds and Series A, they could get money in Europe, but as soon as they became more advanced, then they needed larger rounds, Series C, Series D, or, 200, 300, 400 million rounds. It was impossible to get that money in Europe. So you rely completely on one part of the world. And if that part of the world goes through a turmoil, there is no other option. Now with Europe picking up and having a lot more larger funds who can actually support you, who give access to the companies' larger tickets, at least if there is one part of the world that has a turmoil, there is an option where the companies can still go and raise this money.
I think on top of that discussion, I think you can jump in, Cynthia, was around sort of like the idea of unlocking the pension funds, right? And so this historical idea that European pensions are they're more conservative in their allocation strategies, and so they don't allocate nearly the same percentage that US pensions do to alternative funds.
But that is changing. And it takes time, but it's changing.
And it's changing in the UK. Do you want to talk about?
I was going to say, I'm French, but I live in the UK, so I saw the wind coming through France, and TB and TB2 now was very much a new thing, but it was a great thought process that a lot of countries in Europe then thought, oh, I want a piece of that. And then that we see in the UK, we've gone through this thought process as well, and mentioned House Compact has come out. There's been a press release earlier this week about how that might be implemented, etc. So we certainly are using this particular tailwind to try to unlock sources of capital that were not available 5, 10 years ago. And I think it's something that, as an early stage investor, we see our companies mature, and like Senya and other panelists were mentioning earlier, it was hard to get access to meaningful amount of capital, in particular whilst going through clinical trials that necessitate a certain amount of investment. And NASDAQ has always been a source of this, but there were very few alternatives, whereas now we are seeing more funds who are able to push and finance and nurture these companies later down the line.
Although I would say that also what was mentioned on our panel, one big thing that is actually missing is having something like NASDAQ in Europe, which we all know it's maybe a dream.
It's been a discussion, I think, probably all 25 years of
it started before I was born, and I'm not sure that's probably going to be going after I die. So
I think it's been going for some time, right? There's been all sorts of plans being hatched as well for partnerships and dual listings and all sorts of things. But I think it will probably go on well after I retire. So I'll watch that one.
I don't think we need to spend more than 30 seconds on it. But I guess my view is like, if you can get something together, great. But I mean, it works now.
Don't count on it.
Yeah, let's not count on it. Let's operate as if NASDAQ is the place to go.
But I think that was the positive message that came through a few of the presentations, in particular McKinsey's session, right? There's an opportunity for Europe. Europe is a bit of a beacon of light right now. And we have from seed to later stage, the only thing we are missing are the public markets. But I think that came out quite clearly. And as you're saying, do we actually need another one? Question mark.
I think the other thing that was brought up to Anne's point was, a lot of commentary this week about how European biotechs are just naturally more capital efficient because they have less capital generally to begin with than the U.S. biotechs. I mean, is that something, we heard several folks say that, is that something you subscribe to?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes, when we listen to the companies pitching to us, we say, I hope they would pitch like the Americans, but spend like the Europeans. That's kind of a magic combination.
Yeah, absolutely. I go through this as well. We think Cambridge is a great place to build innovative companies that will be global. The idea is not to do something which is local. It's building these big therapeutic companies and developing new medicines. But we are very conscious about capital efficiency, and we have seen quite a few mega rounds coming. Not as many as in the US, but certainly understanding exactly where the money goes and not having to spend a fortune actually on real estate, which still happens in some of the clusters in the US. Certainly helps take the...
We did have one, for me, a highlight was moderating a fireside chat with Jean-Pierre Laterre of ISO Biotech. And if you want a story of speed and capital efficiency, that's
a good
one.
Yeah.
So he, just to fill it out, he basically started his company. He sort of went from, I think it was 2021 to 2025 with...
Sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. And in that amount of time, built it up, did a clinical trial in China on the basis of that, got a deal with AstraZeneca.
One patient, two patients?
One patient data, one or two patient data maybe by the time they saw it. The deal was for $1 billion with $450 million up front.
$425 million up front to be.
Okay, $425 million. Sorry about that. And then he'd basically, how much capital is he'd started it.
Just seed funding.
I think it was 14. Yeah.
And then he got a little bit more, so he sort of went from, yeah.
But for us, because I talked to some of the investors, and it's a phenomenal case where you really have to be open-minded, and no one would dare to do a clinical trial in China and say, that is the trial that will convince some European or American pharma companies in terms of the quality of the data. So what they did, they audited the site. They understood that the PI was vetted by the pharma and some of the KOLs in Europe. And that's when they ran the clinical trial there. And they did it for half of the cost in half of the time. And it is a learning for some of our companies.
Right.
Yeah, I really think that was one of the key themes that struck me this year. Obviously, we do an East-West roundtable each year here at BioEquity. I would say this was the roundtable that had the most people in the room and the most discussion, not just at that roundtable, but also percolating through the other discussions. And something that struck me that I think Naveed Siddiqui of Nova Holdings had said, and several others echoed this, using the term sort of things have fundamentally changed now in the industry with the innovation coming out of China and Asia. And essentially, if you're a biotech CEO or a biotech VC and you're not looking at China, you're not thinking about China, you are going to get blindsided. You'll get blindsided by competition. You won't see it coming, and you almost have to be aware of what's happening in China. But there's also opportunities to take advantage, some of what the China biotechs have been able to take advantage of, like the ISO Biotech story and getting to early clinical data. That's an opportunity, right?
This is the opportunity where you now plug the scene setter, right? The deck, right?
The scene setter deck, which will be coming out for everyone. So a lot of data that Simone and team put together, really looking at the state of play now. And honestly, for someone
specifically looking at deals from Asia, out licensing from Asia to Western biotechs and farmers, and looking at where that's all gone. And
it'd be interesting to see that, actually. I was quite surprised by the data the McKinsey team put together on the first day, showing how many clinical trials, or the percentage, which was, in 40 plus, right? Percent of the clinical trials being done there. And out of that, 63%, I think it was, of the drugs were actually originating from there. I thought that was quite eye-opening.
It is. This is also Josh going rogue, because you were.
He's got notes. How can he go rogue?
It's in the flow, but it's also, I was going to come to you last to do the whole Asia pitch thing, but I also did learn today that I didn't really know this before, but you're also left-handed. So maybe that explains a little bit sort of the
or they have a
propensity for going off script here.
A saying in China that everything's done at China speed. So maybe I adopted that for the podcast.
You're just too fast. Not to be down on left-handers because I'm myself in left-handed.
Do you know something? I am not left-handed, but I'm about the only person at BioCentury who isn't. We have a ridiculous proportion of left-handed people. We are left, yeah.
Okay.
Left dominant, at least in handedness, if nothing else.
So we're going to take a very brief break, and then we'll come back and continue our discussion.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Grand Rounds, BioCentury's R&D conference, will return in 2025 to the US and Europe to debate key bottlenecks in translation and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us in Chicago this June after ASCO for the second BioCentury Grand Rounds US, and in Cambridge, UK this September for the inaugural Grand Rounds Europe. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
So as many of you know, this is our second ever live podcast. We did one 2 months ago. And sort of during that discussion, if any of you were able to catch it or were there yourselves live, you might recall that there was kind of a lively focus on the socks that the panelists or the
we take it very seriously.
We're wearing. And so I just thought it might be kind of fun that sort of in light of that sort of initial discussion, I kind of put it to everyone that maybe we could kind of make it a bit of a tradition, like people could wear fun socks for the live podcast. I know this is normal, everyday life for Josh.
The colorful shoes also.
Josh,
I think we got to branch out because look at this.
Yeah.
We got.
And I went for the colorful trousers too.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Which is fine.
That's a highlight.
Didn't have to
highlight
socks,
of the
glow-in-the-dark trousers, which is good. We have to describe them for the listeners because not everyone can see. What color are your trousers?
red.
Very red.
And my sneakers are green.
Very good. Josh, what do you want to give us a rundown of your
I don't even know what colors these are, but I was told by Simone that if I didn't bring my socks, that I might not make it on the podcast.
Go ahead.
I thought, I'm not left-handed, but I thought I'd be contrarian. So I looked everywhere for fun socks, which I actually have in my bag. So I've got lovely pig-themed socks.
Very nice.
But it really didn't go with the outfit, and I didn't have time to change beforehand. Fine. So I'm being contrarian, but actually I'm with you in spirit.
I think we're going to have to turn it into a video podcast if we're going to do the sock thing.
Okay.
But I do want to say, actually, just for everybody, this has been a fantastic conference. If there's been one negative, I don't think it's had a great sock game.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What was the tally? How many good socks have you seen?
Not many. So, Josh, you've he's got to do about a sock sponsorship.
I did want to point out that, so I have socks with chemical moieties on them. And if anyone, I don't know if it's easy for the audience to see, but
Stephen.
if you can identify the specific chemical structure, I haven't asked Josh about this, but we'll give you a free comp to the Grand Rounds in Cambridge.
Can you pick out? I think it may be inside out on that bit. So we can't
inside out.
I love the deal-making spirit.
I didn't make the socks, so don't blame me if they're not actually,
The chemist in me is rejoicing.
What's that?
The chemist in me is rejoicing.
You're just going to spend the rest of the time trying to figure out what that one is?
Do you see people sniffing around your ankles,
Let's hope not. Anyways, all right, so let's return to our recap of the past 2 days here. And I know that you were sort of sprinting. I think I saw you like 4 or 5 times where you were like sprinting from one panel to the next or one meeting to the next. So I'm hoping you have a few, like at least one maybe big takeaway that you can share with us. So maybe if I give you the floor here, tell me what was one of your big takeaways.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, that's the nice thing about going last, right? All the good stuff's been said. No, there was a lot of takeaways here. And one of the ones I was quite keen to focus on a little bit here is perhaps a theme that was running through, not necessarily a big takeaway, but a theme going through about people. Because we are in a people business, right? One of the things I actually really love about my job is that it's all about the people. It's the investors that we invest with. It's of course, the teams that we back. It's the services as well who support these businesses. So there's a whole ecosystem here. And right from the word go, and I think that was a really nice way to start the conference, actually, Simone, when you were chatting with Anya, the people side really came out, how Anya was building the team, her thought about leadership. And that transpired all the way through. We saw that in the McKinsey report as well, where 5 of the big activities that are necessary for companies to get through this uncertain times, I've said uncertain, 4 out of 5 of these activities relied on the CEO and the exec team to really execute, use this experience and steer them in the right direction in times which are tough. And that went all the way through. You saw me darting around because I wanted to make sure I actually caught up with a lot of people here, which, of course, is always a great platform. I must say here, I haven't been to 25 bioequities, but that's my 12th, I think, or perhaps 10th. I had a few gaps in between. And they are always wonderful because the whole people thing is what makes our industry tick. So I think we had this really strong plug as well about talent. There's the people, there's the talent. And, one of the panels, Antoine was talking about getting talent back from the US. That's potentially an opportunity, right? A lot of Europeans, a lot of scientists have gone on the other side of the Atlantic. Maybe it's the time when they may feel a little bit homesick, or they may want to come back to their roots. And I think it's for us to open our arms and make sure we get talent back.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. First, Josh, over the years, we've probably really increased the number of people coming to this conference from outside of Europe, right? Sort of showing the relevance not only of what a great conference it is, but also of people in Asia and in the US and other regions sort of want. Have you got any of those numbers like up your sleeve there? Or?
Yeah, I think this is really, this event is anchored in Europe, but Europe is part of the global ecosystem. And so we've seen increased attendance from US VCs, Asia VCs, US bankers. I thought Michael Myers of H.C. Wainwright had some great comments today on the Capital Market Showcase that Erica Whitaker chairs each year for us. But we're getting more and more of that cross-fertilization, I think. And it's really important because, as we've been talking all along, there's no point in being the best biotech in Belgium or the UK or France, take your pick. You got to be globally competitive. And so having the global investors coming here to get to know the companies, get to know their fellow investors is something BioCentury really believes in and we try to lean into.
And going back to your point about people coming over, like at this moment and why now? And so sort of in the panels, it was broken down in this way. So there's, on the one level, Europe has the ability right now to stop people, not stop people, but the chances of people leaving at the PhD or postdoc level, what used to be a normal migration to the US. The US is a lot less attractive a place right now for many people at that stage. And so there's an opportunity to retain that incredible talent that will be the next generation. Then the next level is, I think this was with Antoine that we talked about it, the idea that there are many Europeans in the US who might be encouraged in the same, like the sea turtle way of China. I know where you're going to go with this in a minute, but let me just finish this thought. That they might be encouraged to come back. You call it homesick, but maybe they can be incentivized or encouraged. And now you're bringing back experienced talent, right? And then there's another level, which is, would US researchers or US people, for example, like ex-regulators, people who've, no longer there, might they actually find a different environment? Could you attract them?
Back.
And whether people didn't like the word policy, but frankly, incentives is the same as policy. And so there's always been this question of, is this Europe, like why now? Europe's never really been able to get its act together until now. And I think the answer is that it's never really needed to. It's, even if Europe fixed its regulatory system or any of these things, it was always only going to be a distant second. And now there is this idea that things in the US, at least in the innovation ecosystem, are uncertain, are troubling, on a human front, are not a great place to be. A lot of people aren't really that comfortable in those academic institutes. They can't study, let's say, they can't get federal funding for mRNA vaccines, right? So come to Europe and do it is the answer, right?
Yeah, and I think some countries have been very proactive, right? I saw on LinkedIn quite recently in one of the countries in Europe saying, hey, open doors, we've got 2 years worth of funding for you, come and do research.
And Ursula von der Leyen has made that statement, and Macron, and so on, so yeah.
I think that is like, and especially, when you talk about it, I think there's lots of different opportunities where Europe can sort of be a stabilizing force sort of in this, amongst the uncertainty.
Or an alternative.
Or an alternative.
Yeah.
But I guess I've always thought that where there's a challenge is if it requires any sort of legislative move to make it happen, the bureaucracy of Europe, I think we can all agree, is usually quite slow moving. And so that's why I think from the talent perspective, because it wouldn't require any legislative intervention, it's sort of one of the lowest hanging fruits, and feel like that's a place where it seems like you can easily sort of all get behind and really jump in and try and provide the most attractive setting you can to try and bring some of that talent home?
You know what we start to see now, for example, in our portfolio companies, and it is pretty surprising. We start to see when we look for a CEO, and at a certain point, of course, you would want to look for an American CEO, and then you knew that actually you were moving the C-suite into the US. Now we see the opposite. American CEOs, they want to move into Europe. And that is quite different from it used to be.
Yeah, so I guess the one final follow-up, when you mentioned, the analogy obviously is the sea turtle movement of native Chinese coming to the US and then moving back to China. Here at BioEquity, I was kind of hoping we could maybe coin, what would the phrase be for Europeans migrating back to Europe? What marine animal should we tie to this? So,
that should be a competition. You should open that to the public.
Well, that's what I'm going to do right now.
Why does it have to be a marine animal?
Oh,
you have to cross the ocean. You could fly.
Sea turtle.
You could fly.
You could fly.
Like puffin? What if it was the puffin movement? Or seals, if we called it a seal?
Seals are boring.
Seals are boring?
I love seals.
I think seals are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you have any suggestions, please write in, send us your...
So flying, walking, shuffling, swimming, anything works.
And do you have a better suggestion off the top of your head? Or
swallows?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. Work with that. Good.
Right, damn, now I'm on this podcast saying seals are boring. I'm going to get hate mail.
Going to get cut.
So, I'm going to get the seal club.
Don't go to San Francisco, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
the people of Norfolk are really going to be after you.
This is going to be bad. Let's go back to tennis at least.
Okay. So I think we need to wrap up here. So but before we close, I know sort of the next thing where BioCentury is going to be coming to Europe is obviously going to be Grand Rounds in Cambridge in September. And I just wanted to give you very briefly, if you don't mind, just tell me what you're excited about with the idea of Grand Rounds coming to the UK in September.
Thank you for the question. Actually, I'm super excited about this. And it started last year at BioEquity when Eric and I met. And we're trying to scratch our heads as what we could do in Cambridge. And we were thinking BioEquity maybe, but that's actually a huge thing. And then thinking about what Cambridge is known for. And, at Cambridge Innovation Capital, we finance businesses that are potentially groundbreaking. They tend to be science, very science heavy. And we have got a great university on our doorstep as well as great research institutes. So it made a lot of sense to think beyond BioEquity, which is what we were originally talking about, and think about Grand Rounds. So Cambridge Innovation Capital is part of the regional host committee for Grand Rounds. And we've been working with everybody on this panel, so Josh, Simon, KTT, Stephen, other people, and putting together a super exciting agenda. So I don't want to let it out of the bag, but if people want to have a quick look onto the keynotes and fireside chats that have already been identified and secured, I think you'll find that pretty exciting. And CIC is really looking forward to bringing everyone, hopefully here and more, to Cambridge.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to have it in what is my backyard as well, living outside of Cambridge.
And that's September 17th to 19th, Cambridge, UK. You can learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com. We would love to have you there and join in the discussion.
Good job, Josh. We need all the official details. Thank you, Josh, for the plug there. Wonderful. So I think that's all we have time for this week. So, thank you to our live audience for joining us for this special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. We will catch you next week wherever you get your podcasts, or in case you are here with us live next year for BioEquity 2026. We will be in. You want to do a drum roll?
I don't know. Is he allowed to say this?
Yeah, I did ask ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay.
The drum roll is in Prague.
Wow.
So that's quite fun. So so we'll see everyone next year in Prague.
We're looking forward to it. And to carry that on, we're going to have the official handoff ceremony right here now. Right after this session, we'll have drinks for everyone. And so please stick around for the closing reception and the handoff ceremony. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
BioCentury would like to thank Jeito Capital for its continued support of our BioCentury This Week podcast.